the support that it has received, including from Ecuador, the first country really to align with Washington. A decree from Ecuadorian President Daniel Noboa designates the Cartel de los Soles as a terrorist group of organized crime. Now, the president of Paraguay, and that's Santiago Peña, followed Ecuador's path. Argentina has also declared the group a terrorist organization this Tuesday. And the successive statements that we're seeing from Latin American governments against the cartel and President Maduro were celebrated by this lady, as you all know, we've had her numerous times on the show, Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. But Colombian President Gustavo Petro is one of the few regional leaders who has questioned Washington's decision to go after the alleged drug trafficking groups. Venezuela itself, as well as its neighbor, Colombia, as you can see there, insists Cartel de los Soles doesn't even exist. Well, joining me now is Jeff Ramsey. He is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Adrian Ashta Latin American Center and an expert on U.S. policy toward Venezuela. Jeff, good to see you again. We are seeing, I think it's fair to say, and you give me your insight there from Washington, there's not only escalating rhetoric, but also like rising tensions from both sides. How do you assess this moment? I mean, are we likely to see military confrontation, or is this purely intimidation here?
Yeah, well, I think that's the real question. I mean, the reality is that despite the rhetoric, the U.S. doesn't appear to be preparing to intervene militarily in Venezuela. The truth is that Trump was elected to end wars, not to start them. And we've seen other indications that Washington is actually interested in engaging with Caracas behind the scenes. We saw President Trump soften oil sanctions last month on Venezuela, and we're seeing increasing coordination with Maduro on deportations. The Washington Post yesterday reported that 2 deportation flights occurred this week alone. I think all that suggests that Washington is trying to keep channels open with Caracas, not gearing up for war.
So what you've just outlined, Jeff, is really interesting because on one side you're seeing, these naval ships being moved, but at the same time, as you've just highlighted, we've seen slightly warming of relations when it comes to oil, of course, the easing of sanctions. What is then the aim from the United States? What is it looking to achieve realistically, you think? Because they're saying they're going after the cartels to try and weaken that. Do you believe that, or is a pronged push here?
Yeah, well, I think the reality is that there are different theories of change in Venezuela within the administration itself.
Yeah.
I think you have one strain that explains the recent engagement with Venezuela and the recent softening of oil sanctions on Venezuela. And that's also, there's another strain which is really backing this show of force. I think the reality is that this naval deployment is less about an invasion plan and is more about signaling. I think there are those in the White House that think that if they signal to disaffected insiders inside the regime, that they can get them to jump ship and turn against Maduro. The problem with that is that we've seen Maduro very effectively dismantle every coup attempt in Venezuela over the last 25 years.
I was going to interrupt you. I was going to say, we've been here so many times, Jeff. We've seen this so many times, and it hasn't had the desired effect the United States wants. If anything, some may even say it's only strengthened Maduro. So what is, if nothing happens here, how do you think this may play out for the United States? Okay, so they move their ships, so what next? Because the US saying that this is because of to combat drug cartels in the region. The White House press secretary even went further yesterday, roughly at this time yesterday. Have a listen to this.
The Maduro regime is not the legitimate government of Venezuela. It is a narco-terror cartel. Maduro is not a legitimate president. He is a fugitive head of this drug cartel. He has been indicted in the United States for trafficking drugs into our country.
So very clear the message we're getting from the United States. Is it led by Maduro? What do you know? What can you tell us about Cartel de los Soles?
Yeah, so, the Cartel de los Soles has been shorthand for military involvement in drug trafficking in Venezuela over the last 25 years. It's a very real problem. However, I think the truth is that cocaine makes its way north to the United States, not only through the Caribbean, but also through the Pacific Ocean. The recent UNODC World Drug Report suggests that about 70% or more of the cocaine that's bound for the north actually makes its way to the U.S. via the Pacific Ocean. And so, I think that's one reason why you're seeing Secretary Rubio about to visit Ecuador and Mexico later this week. I think the reality is that the U.S. understands that this is the first step to deepen regional coordination in fighting the cartels, and they're going to need buy-in from leaders in Mexico, Ecuador, and elsewhere.
And as you're talking about buying regionally, we are starting, and we set it up just before we went to you to see how countries regionally are reacting to this. We're starting already, Jeff, to see a divide clearly between those who want to see potentially regime change or would back regime change from the United States and those who worry about a precedent. What are you seeing regionally as these tensions, of course, up in the last few days or so?
Yeah, so I think there's a difference in the response from countries like Paraguay and Ecuador that don't share a border with Venezuela, and neighboring governments, not only governments on the left like Colombia and Brazil, but also the government of Panama, which is a right-wing government which just opened up diplomatic relations with Venezuela yesterday. I think the reality is that these countries understand that they would be the most affected by an outflow of migrants and refugees if there was any kind of destabilizing military attack. And it's why governments like Colombia's have come out openly and said that they've received assurances from the U.S. government that there's no kind of military action on the table.
Yeah, can I just pick your brain? You're in Washington. What it seems to be clear, and I think you probably can give us more details on this, is that there are divisions within this White House as to what kind of policy we like to see, right? More the hawks who want to see possibly more military action, and those, of course, who think let's stick to the immigration concerns and the cartel concerns. Can you speak to those two pressures that President Trump probably is facing in Washington?
Yeah, the reality is that there is one wing of the administration which believes that Maduro is weak and that with this kind of a show of force, we can see some kind of a military uprising against him within Venezuela. And then there's another faction in the administration which proposes a more gradual approach, a more sort of carrots and sticks based approach to trying to open up the country's democracy, to open up the country's institutions and return to democracy. I think that's one reason why you've seen this sort of forked approach. On the one hand, you see Washington has decided to lift sanctions on Venezuela and is cooperating with the Maduro regime on deportation flights. And on the other hand, you see this naval deployment in the Caribbean. In the long term, I don't expect that Maduro is going to be toppled by some kind of disaffected elements inside the regime, because we haven't seen that play out over the last 25 years.
No, and we were close to seeing that, or at least many thought that we would see that, right, in the last, 7 years or so. That hasn't happened. We shall see what happens in the next few weeks. Jeff, really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.